The story begins, imagine, waking before sunrise, knowing that before nightfall you might have to abandon your home forever. You cannot tell your neighbors where you're going. You cannot leave a letter behind. Every possession you own must fit into a single bag. The family Bible, perhaps the most treasured object in your house, is hidden beneath your clothes. Outside, soldiers patrol the streets, watching every road leading out of town. Your only crime? You worship God differently. This was the terrifying reality for hundreds of thousands of French Protestants, known as the Huguenots. During one of Europe's greatest religious persecutions, some escaped under the cover of darkness. Some were imprisoned before they ever reached the border. Many never saw France again. Yet the names they carried did survive. Those surnames crossed mountains, rivers, and oceans. They appeared on passenger lists, church registers, military records, and land grants. Over time, they became part of the histories of England, the Netherlands, Germany, South Africa, and colonial America. Today, millions of people unknowingly carry surnames that began this extraordinary journey more than 3 centuries ago. This is the remarkable story of faith, courage, exile, and survival. This is the story of the Huguenot surnames. Before we begin, if you enjoy history, genealogy, and the fascinating stories hidden behind family names, please subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue uncovering forgotten chapters of history and bringing them back to life for audiences around the world. Now, let's travel back to France. France before the storm. To understand why thousands of families abandoned everything they owned, we first need to understand the France they lived in. The France of the 17th century was one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms. Its populations exceeded 20 million people, making it one of the largest nations on the continent. Great cathedrals dominated city skylines. Magnificent castles overlooked rivers and valleys. Paris had become a center of learning, commerce, and royal authority. French language, fashion, architecture, and culture were admired across Europe. But beneath this image of greatness lay deep religious divisions. For centuries, almost every French citizen was expected to belong to the Roman Catholic Church. Religion was not simply a matter of personal belief. It shaped politics, it shaped education, it shaped law, it shaped daily life. Questioning religious authority was often viewed as questioning the authority of the king himself. Then came the Protestant Reformation. In the early 16th century, reformers across Europe challenged many teachings and practices of the Catholic Church. Their ideas spread rapidly through books, traveling scholars, merchants, and preachers. One of the most influential reformers was John Calvin, whose teachings found many followers in France. Those French Calvinists would become known as the Huguenots. No one is completely certain where the word Huguenot originated. Some historians believe it came from a German political term. Others believe it evolved from local French expressions. Whatever its origin, by the mid-16th century, it identified France's Protestant minority. Although they never formed a majority, the Huguenots became remarkably influential. They included skilled craftsmen, silk weavers, jewelers, merchants, printers, doctors, lawyers, soldiers, scholars, even members of the French nobility. Many belonged to the growing middle class that drove trade and innovation throughout France. Their churches were simple compared with Catholic cathedrals. Their worship focused heavily on Scripture. Their ministers preached directly from the Bible. Congregational singing became central to their services. Their communities placed great emphasis on education because every believer was encouraged to read the Bible personally. This commitment to literacy would later become one of their greatest strengths. But it also made them targets. A kingdom divided religious disagreement soon became political conflict. Throughout the second half of the 16th century, France descended into a series of devastating civil wars. Catholics and Protestants fought one another for influence over the kingdom. Entire towns changed hands. Families became divided. Neighbor turned against neighbor. The violence shocked Europe. Perhaps no event symbolized this tragedy more than the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572. What began as a royal wedding intended to promote peace ended in horror. Thousands of Huguenots who had gathered in Paris were attacked. The violence spread to other cities. Many historians estimate that several thousand Protestants lost their lives. For surviving Huguenot families, the massacre became a memory passed from generation to generation. Parents warned their children never to forget what had happened. Trust became difficult. Fear became part of everyday life. France desperately needed peace. A promise of peace in 1598. King Henry IV issued one of the most important documents in French history. It became known as the Edict of Nantes. Henry himself had experienced both Protestant and Catholic traditions during his lifetime. He understood how deeply divided the kingdom had become. The Edict of Nantes attempted to end decades of conflict. It granted the Huguenots significant religious freedoms. They could worship in many areas. They could establish churches. They could hold public office. They received certain legal protections. Although the arrangement was far from perfect, it created a fragile peace. For nearly 90 years, many Huguenot communities flourished, churches reopened, schools expanded, businesses prospered, families invested in farms and workshops, trade increased. French industry benefited enormously from Huguenot skill. Silk production improved, metalworking advanced, printing expanded, glassmaking flourished, watchmaking gained an international reputation. Many of the finest craftsmen in Europe happened to be Huguenots. Their reputation for discipline, education, and craftsmanship spread far beyond France. Few people realized how quickly that success could disappear. The rise of Louis everything changed under one man, King Louis XIV. History remembers him as the Sun King. He ruled France longer than almost any other European monarch. He transformed the French monarchy into one of absolute royal authority. His magnificent palace of Versailles became a symbol of wealth and power, unlike anything Europe had ever seen. But Louis XIV also believed something else. One king, one law, one faith to him. Religious unity strengthened political unity. A kingdom divided by religion could become a kingdom divided by loyalty. At first, restrictions against Protestants appeared gradually. Some churches were closed. Some schools lost permission to operate. Government positions became harder to obtain. Conversions to Catholicism were encouraged. Sometimes rewards were offered. Sometimes pressure was applied. Sometimes intimidation replaced persuasion. The atmosphere slowly changed. Many Huguenots sensed danger long before disaster officially arrived. The dragonnades among the most feared policies was something called the dragonnades. Royal soldiers, known as dragoons, were quartered inside Protestant homes. Imagine strangers entering your house without permission, eating your food, sleeping in your beds, damaging your property, threatening your family. The purpose was simple: to make daily life so unbearable that Protestant families would convert to Catholicism. Some resisted, others gave in under immense pressure. Still others secretly remained Protestant while publicly pretending otherwise. Fear spread through villages across France. Pécrins whispered after dark. Church meetings became secret. Families hid religious books. Children learned when to remain silent. Neighbors could no longer be trusted. One careless conversation might bring soldiers to your door. The Revocation then came the turning point. In October 1685, Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes. The new decree became known as the Edict of Fontainebleau. Almost overnight, legal protection for French Protestants disappeared. Churches were ordered destroyed. Pastors were commanded to leave France. Protestant schools closed. Public worship became illegal. Ordinary believers were forbidden to emigrate. That last order created an impossible situation. People were told they could not practice their religion, but they were also forbidden to leave. Many faced a heartbreaking choice: abandon their faith or abandon their country. For countless Huguenot families, the decision had already been made. If they stayed, future generations might never worship freely again. If they fled, they would lose nearly everything they owned: their homes, their farms, their workshops, their businesses, their inheritance. Even their homeland, they chose freedom. But escaping France would prove far more dangerous than they imagined. The year was 1685. Across France, the sound of church bells no longer meant worship for the Huguenots. Instead, it became a reminder that their churches had been closed, their pastors expelled, and their religious freedom erased. For generations, these families had believed they belonged in France. Their ancestors had farmed the same fields, operated the same workshops, and worshipped in the same communities for decades. Now they were considered outsiders in their own homeland. Leaving legally was forbidden, but staying could mean imprisonment, forced conversion, or a lifetime without the freedom to practice their faith. Thousands reached the same conclusion: if they wanted a future, they had to escape, and so began one of the greatest refugee movements in European history. A secret decision no family made the decision lightly. Leaving France meant abandoning nearly everything they had worked for. A farmer couldn't carry his land. A blacksmith couldn't take his forge. A merchant often had to leave behind his shop, inventory, and customers. Homes built over generations would soon belong to strangers. Many Huguenots sold valuables in secret, converting possessions into small amounts of gold or silver that could be hidden inside clothing. Others buried family treasures, hoping one day they might return. Many never did. The hardest part was deciding what to carry: a family Bible, marriage records, birth certificates, a few coins, some clothes, perhaps a treasured piece of jewelry passed down through generations. Everything else had to be left behind. Penitents often told their children they were simply going on a journey. The younger children rarely understood that they would never see their home again. Escaping under cover of darkness because emigration was illegal, escapes usually happened at night. Families traveled in silence. No lanterns, no loud voices. Even barking dogs could alert neighbors. Groups often followed trusted guides who knew hidden forest paths, mountain passes, and quiet river crossings. Some guides were paid. Others were fellow Protestants risking their own lives. Every journey carried danger. Royal patrols guarded major roads. Bridges were watched. Ports were inspected. Ford crossings became increasingly difficult. If caught, adults could face prison. Children might be separated from their parents. Pastors often received even harsher punishment. Many families traveled only a few miles each night before hiding in barns, caves, or abandoned buildings during daylight. Every sunrise brought new anxiety. Would someone recognize them? Would a neighbor betray them? Would soldiers appear? Crossing the mountains for many refugees. The safest escape routes crossed difficult terrain. The Alps offered one path towards Switzerland. The rugged mountains were beautiful, but unforgiving. Winter snow covered narrow trails. Steep cliffs threatened every step. Food became scarce. Young children struggled to keep up. Older relatives often found the journey exhausting. Yet families continued forward, because turning back meant returning to persecution. Others escaped through forests toward the German states. Some followed rivers toward the Netherlands. Every route had its own dangers. Smugglers sometimes demanded enormous payments. Dishonest guides occasionally abandoned travelers. Storms delayed journeys. Illness spread easily. Still, thousands succeeded. Escaped by sea, not everyone traveled over land. Some Huguenots reached coastal ports where sympathetic ship captains quietly offered passage. Small fishing boats became lifelines. Merchant vessels secretly carried Protestant refugees hidden among cargo. Night departures reduced the risk of discovery. The sea, however, offered no guarantee of safety. Storms threatened wooden ships. Disease spread quickly below deck. Food supplies often ran low. Passengers endured cramped, uncomfortable conditions. Many had never seen the ocean before. They left France, watching its coastline slowly disappear into the distance, uncertain whether they would ever return. For countless families, that final glimpse became one of the most emotional moments of their lives. The countries that opened their doors, unlike France, several Protestant nations welcomed the refugees. England quickly became one of the most important destinations. London already had small French Protestant communities. Churches were established where worship could continue in the French language. Refugees received assistance from local congregations. Many settled in districts that soon became famous for silk weaving and skilled craftsmanship. The Netherlands also welcomed thousands. Dutch cities were among Europe's busiest trading centers. Here, Huguenot merchants found opportunities to rebuild businesses. Printers restarted their presses. Artisans reopened workshops. Families slowly began new lives. In Switzerland, French-speaking communities offered familiar language and culture. The transition was difficult, but many refugees found safety at last. The German states, especially Brandenburg, Prussia, actively encouraged Huguenot immigration. Their rulers understood something important. These refugees brought valuable skills. They were educated, hardworking, experienced in manufacturing, trade, farming, and finance. Welcoming them strengthened the economy. What France had lost, other nations eagerly gained. Starting again, from nothing, arriving safely did not mean life became easy. Many families reached foreign cities with almost no money. They spoke different languages. They had no homes, no land, no employment. Everything had to begin again. Churches became centers of support. Established Huguenot communities shared food, clothing, and temporary housing. Local governments sometimes offered assistance. Guilds welcomed skilled craftsmen. Merchants introduced newcomers to trading networks. Little by little, refugees rebuilt their lives. Silk weaving became one of the greatest success stories. French Huguenot weavers transformed textile industries in England and elsewhere. Jewelers introduced refined techniques. Clockmakers improved precision craftsmanship. Glassmakers shared specialized knowledge. Book printers established respected publishing houses. Within a generation, many refugee families had regained prosperity, not because life had been easy, but because they carried valuable skills wherever they went. The surnames began to change as Huguenot families settled in new countries. Something unexpected happened. Their surnames began to change. Officials often struggled to pronounce French names. Clerks wrote names according to local spelling. Sometimes families deliberately simplified their names to fit into their new communities. A surname written one way in France could appear differently in England only a few years later. Children born abroad often adopted local spellings. Over several generations, entirely new versions emerged. This explains why modern descendants may not immediately recognize their French origins. Behind many English-speaking surnames lies a forgotten French story. Genealogists today often trace these subtle spelling changes through church records, immigration documents, wills, and marriage certificates. Each variation tells part of the refugee journey. A community that refused to disappear despite losing their homeland, the Huguenots refused to lose their identity. They established French churches, opened schools, published books, maintained family traditions, recorded baptisms and marriages. Their ministers encouraged education, discipline, and mutual support. Children learned both the language of their new country and the history of the one their parents had left behind. Stories of escape became family history. Grandparents described mountain crossings. Parents remembered secret worship. Children grew up hearing about the courage that had brought them to safety. Those memories helped preserve a unique cultural identity for generations. The journey beyond Europe. Although many refugees remained in Europe, others looked across the Atlantic. A new world offered new opportunities. The American colonies needed skilled workers, merchants, farmers, and craftsmen. Colonial governors often welcomed Protestant settlers. Some Huguenot families accepted the challenge. They boarded ships once again. This time, their destination was not another European kingdom. It was America. The voyage lasted weeks, sometimes months. Storms battered ships. Disease remained a constant threat, yet hope outweighed fear. Beyond the horizon lay land where they believed their children could worship freely and build new futures. Few could imagine how deeply their descendants would influence American history. Their surnames would appear in military service, business, politics, education, and frontier settlements. The exile that began in France was about to shape an entirely new nation. For many Huguenot families, escaping France was only the beginning. They had survived persecution. They had crossed mountains. They had sailed across dangerous seas. But one final journey still lay ahead. Across the Atlantic Ocean, a new world was waiting. The American colonies were still young. Vast forests stretched beyond the settlements. Rivers flowed through unexplored landscapes. New towns appeared every year. And colonial leaders desperately needed skilled workers, experienced farmers, merchants, and craftsmen. To thousands of Huguenot refugees, America represented something they had not known for years: freedom. Not just the freedom to work, not just the freedom to own land, but the freedom to worship without fear. For the first time in many years, they could build churches without worrying that soldiers would arrive at the door. It was a dream worth risking, another dangerous voyage. Crossing the Atlantic crossing was nothing like modern travel. A journey that takes only hours today often lasted 6 to 12 weeks. In the late 17th century, ships were crowded. Food was limited, fresh water became scarce. Storms could delay voyages for days or even weeks. Disease spread quickly among passengers living in cramped wooden cabins. Many travelers had never seen the open ocean before leaving Europe. The endless waves seemed terrifying. Parents tried to comfort frightened children while wondering if they had made the right decision. Some ships never reached their destination. Others arrived damaged after violent storms. Yet, despite every hardship, thousands of Huguenot refugees reached North America. Their arrival would quietly change the future of the colonies. Where the Huguenots settled, unlike some immigrant groups who settled in a single region, Huguenot families spread throughout several colonies. One of the earliest centers was New York. At the time, it was still developing into one of America's most important ports. French-speaking Protestant congregations appeared, allowing newcomers to worship in their own language while gradually adapting to English society. Further south, many settled in Virginia. Here, they received land grants and established farming communities. The fertile soil allowed families to grow crops and rebuild their lives. South Carolina soon became another major destination. Charleston welcomed many Huguenot merchants, craftsmen, and traders. The city became one of the largest Huguenot communities in North America. Its French Protestant church, founded in the late 17th century, still stands today as a reminder of that remarkable migration. Other families settled in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and smaller frontier communities. Although separated by great distances, they remained connected through shared faith, family networks, and church records. Bringing skills across the ocean, the Huguenots did not arrive empty-handed. They carried knowledge, skills, experience. Many had already rebuilt successful lives in England or the Netherlands before deciding to continue to America. Others came directly from refugee communities across Europe. Silk weavers introduced advanced textile techniques, blacksmiths forged better tools, carpenters built homes, churches, and mills. Merchants connected colonial ports with European markets. Doctors and surgeons brought valuable medical knowledge. Teachers established schools where children learned reading, writing, mathematics, and religious studies. Printers helped spread books, newspapers, and official documents throughout the colonies. Their influence reached almost every part of colonial society. In many towns, Huguenot refugees quickly earned reputations for honesty, discipline, and hard work. Those qualities opened doors that had once been closed to them in France. Famous Huguenot surnames. As these families settled across the colonies, their surnames became part of American history. Some names kept their original French spelling, others slowly changed to fit English pronunciation. Among the best-known Huguenot surnames were Dubois, Lefebvre, Durand, Joubert, Laurens, Ravenel, Marion, Bosquet, Fontaine, Delancey, Fanuel, and Manigault. Many of these names still appear in American records today. Some became associated with successful merchants. Others became military officers, politicians, judges, ministers, educators, and landowners. Over time, the French pronunciation often disappeared, but the family history remained. Genealogists continue to trace these names back to refugee communities that escaped France after 1685. Every church register and immigration record helps tell another chapter of the story. The story of Francis Marion, one's surname, became famous throughout the American Revolution. Francis Marion was born in South Carolina to a family of Huguenot descent. His grandparents had escaped religious persecution in France. Their decision to seek freedom shaped the future of their descendants. During the Revolutionary War, Francis Marion became known as the Swamp Fox. Instead of fighting large traditional battles, he led fast-moving attacks against British forces through the swamps and forests of South Carolina. His knowledge of the land allowed him to strike unexpectedly before disappearing again into the wilderness. His tactics inspired later generations of military leaders. The courage that had once driven his ancestors to flee France now appeared in a different form. The fight for American independence. Churches that preserved history for Huguenot families. Churches served a purpose far beyond worship. They preserved identity. Inside church registers, ministers carefully recorded baptisms, marriages, and burials. These records remain some of the most valuable sources for modern genealogists. Many families whose stories disappeared from government records can still be traced through church books. French language services continued for decades. Gradually, English became more common. Children born in America often spoke English more fluently than French. Yet many families continued to remember where they had come from. Stories passed from grandparents to grandchildren. The names of villages in France survived long after the families themselves had left. Adapting without forgetting life in America required adaptation. The landscape was unfamiliar. The climate varied dramatically from Europe. Relations with Native American nations differed from one colony to another. New laws had to be learned. New business partnerships formed. Children attended English-speaking schools. French accents slowly faded. Surnames changed spelling, yet many traditions survived. Family Bibles remained treasured possessions. Religious values continued to shape daily life. Education remained important. Hard work became a defining characteristic of many Huguenot communities. Within only 2 or 3 generations, many descendants considered themselves fully American. Still, the memory of France never completely disappeared. Success, through determination. What makes the Huguenot story remarkable is not simply that they survived. It is how quickly they rebuilt. Families who had lost everything became successful merchants. Craftsmen established respected businesses. Farmers transformed wilderness into productive land. Children who arrived as refugees grew into lawyers. Ministers, physicians, military officers, and political leaders, their success was not immediate. It required years of sacrifice. But their determination proved stronger than the persecution they had escaped. Ironically, France had driven away some of its most talented citizens. Other nations benefited from their knowledge and industry. Historians often describe this migration as one of the greatest brain drains of the 17th century. The skills that once strengthened France now have helped build England, the Netherlands, Prussia, South Africa, and America. A legacy written in names today, millions of Americans carry surnames whose journey began in France centuries ago. Some know their family history, many do not. A name that appears perfectly English today may once have been written in elegant French. A family tradition about an ancestor coming from France may actually refer to a Huguenot refugee escaping religious persecution. Old church records, passenger lists, land, grants, marriage certificates. Military roles, each document adds another piece to the puzzle. Together, they tell the story of families who refused to abandon their beliefs, even when it meant leaving everything behind. Their courage was passed down through generations, not only in memories, but also in the surnames that survive to this day. More than 300 years have passed since frightened Huguenot families quietly slipped across the borders of France. The soldiers are gone, the secret escape routes have faded into history. Many of the churches they left behind no longer exist, but something remarkable survived. Their names, every time a descendant signs a document, traces a family tree, or discovers an old ancestor in a church register. Another piece of the Huguenot story comes back to life. What began as a desperate escape became one of the most influential migrations in modern history. The Huguenots did not simply survive, they helped shape the world. Where are Huguenot surnames today? Today, Huguenot descendants can be found across the globe. Their surnames appear in the United States, Canada, England, Scotland, Ireland, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand, and especially South Africa, where thousands of French Protestant families settled at the Cape during the late 17th century. Some surnames remain almost unchanged. Others have evolved through centuries of different languages and pronunciations. A name that once sounded unmistakably French may now appear completely English, Dutch, or Afrikaans. Yet behind each spelling lies the same remarkable journey, a journey that began with courage. Why so many names changed one question often puzzles family historians. Why can't they find the exact surname listed in French records? The answer is surprisingly simple. Names changed naturally. When Huguenot refugees arrived in England, local officials often wrote names exactly as they sounded. French accents disappeared. Silent letters were dropped. Some endings were simplified. Children later adopted English spelling. Within only 2 or 3 generations, many families were using completely new versions of their original surnames. Sometimes these changes happened deliberately. Families wanted to fit into their new communities. Changing a difficult French spelling made everyday life easier. Although the spelling changed, the family's history remained the same. Tracing your Huguenot ancestors, if you believe your family may have Huguenot roots, where should you begin? The first step is to speak with older relatives. Family stories often preserve important clues that never appear in official records. Perhaps someone remembers an ancestor from France. Perhaps an old family Bible contains names and dates. Perhaps an heirloom has been passed down through generations. Next, explore church records. Huguenot churches carefully recorded baptisms, marriages, and burials. These registers are among the most valuable resources available to genealogists. Passenger lists can also reveal when families arrived in England, the Netherlands, South Africa, or the American colonies. Land records, wills, military service records, and census documents often fill in the remaining details. Tracing a Huguenot family is like assembling a giant historical puzzle. Each document adds another piece. Sometimes the journey stretches back centuries. Sometimes a single forgotten record changes everything. Famous descendants, the influence of Huguenot families reached far beyond religion. Their descendants became military leaders, scientists, artists, politicians, business owners, educators, explorers across Britain, America, and South Africa. Huguenot descendants helped build industries, universities, churches, hospitals, and governments. Many became respected community leaders. Others quietly shaped local history through farming, education, trade, and public service. Most never became famous. Yet their everyday contributions helped build stronger communities wherever they settled. History often celebrates kings and generals, but nations are also built by ordinary families willing to work hard, educate their children, and preserve their values. The Huguenots were among those families. What France lost? Historians continue to debate the long-term effects of the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. One consequence, however, is widely recognized. France lost tens of thousands of skilled citizens, silk weavers, goldsmiths, engineers, merchants, printers, doctors, teachers, craftsmen, entrepreneurs. Their departure weakened important industries. Meanwhile, the countries that welcomed them gained experienced workers whose knowledge strengthened local economies. England's textile industry expanded. Prussia encouraged new manufacturing, Dutch commerce benefited, South African agriculture grew. The American colonies gained skilled settlers who helped develop towns, businesses, and trade. What France drove away, much of the world eagerly embraced. More than just a name, a surname is more than a collection of letters. It is a connection to the people who came before us. For Huguenot descendants, that connection often stretches back to families who chose faith over comfort, freedom over security, hope over fear. Behind every old surname lies a human story. Parents protecting children, grandparents saying goodbye to the only home they had ever known, families beginning again in unfamiliar lands. Their courage cannot be measured simply by the distance they traveled. It is measured by what they were willing to leave behind. The lasting legacy today, freedom of religion, is considered a fundamental right in many countries. But the Huguenot story reminds us that such freedoms were never guaranteed. They were purchased through sacrifice, through endurance, through extraordinary courage. The Huguenots refused to surrender their beliefs, even when doing so meant exile. Their story has inspired generations of historians, genealogists, and descendants who continue searching for their roots. Each discovered document, each restored church register, each identified family line ensures that their history will never be forgotten. Final thoughts: perhaps your own surname carries a hidden history. Perhaps an ancestor crossed an ocean with nothing but faith and determination. Perhaps somewhere in your family tree, a frightened child walked beside parents through forests, climbed mountain trails, or boarded a crowded ship, never knowing that their descendants would one day live in freedom. History is not only found in castles, palaces, and battlefields, it also lives in ordinary families. It lives in old letters, in faded church records, in forgotten cemeteries, and sometimes it lives in the name you carry every single day. The Huguenot Exodus of 1685 was more than a migration. It was the beginning of a legacy that continues across continents and generations. Their homes were taken, their churches were closed, their country was left behind, but their faith endured. Their determination endured, and their surnames endured. That is why, more than 3 centuries later, the story of the Huguenots is not simply a chapter of French history. It is part of the history of the world. Thank you for joining us on the ocean of history's greatest stories of resilience and hope. If you enjoyed this documentary and would like to explore more fascinating histories behind surnames, forgotten migrations, and remarkable family legacies, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves history and genealogy. Until next time, keep exploring the past, because every name has a story, and every story deserves to be remembered.